Welcome to Squirrel YouTube channel. What's going on here? This is our biochar trough, but what's going on? We're burning outside the trough. Why? Because we're drying out char that we made yesterday, and you gotta quench it so it's wet. And this is part of a trade. Actually, a trade agreement on a valued commodity for garden soil. And we're going to ship it, and it's easier to ship it without the moisture. So that's why I'm tending the fire underneath the trough. And I thought, well, this is a great opportunity to share the importance of carbon in the soil. So the best I can come up with is reading a couple pages by the fire from Carbon Connection. You know, it's like soil is where carbon belongs, especially in pursuit of growing healthy vegetables. Healthy soil. What's been happening over the past 70, 80 years is that chemical fertilizers replace the knowledge that is inherent in nature. And what is it? The carbon to nitrogen ratio in creating humus, which is living soil, which grows good food that nourishes you. And the fewer and fewer farmers out there that incorporate this basic concept of carbon understanding. Oh, I could turn this off. Okay, I'm going to turn that off. I'm going to turn off the propane so it'll be nice and quiet. And, you know, some people do it for a hobby and enjoy growing a little propane, growing some favorite sort of vegetables like a tomato. But, you know, I've always wanted to, like, I spent a good amount of time working in restaurants because as on the totem of careerism, I didn't want to invest too much time in my career because I had other interests. After I left the service industry and restaurants, I gravitated to gardens. And it's only in the past 8 years that I understand there's a science to it. You don't need to just like throw it to the wind, throw seeds, water, and hope for the best, because you lose a lot. And if we want to be efficient and we want to invest some time in no-fail gardening, I think there's some basic concepts I just want to go over. And this book delineates quite a bit. Because technically, well, not technically, industrially, chemical fertilizers have been added to the soil to create lots of food. And that whole pursuit is coming to an end with the supply chain failure, but also with the end result of food isn't nutrient dense anymore because the soil is so depleted. For every 1 pound of excess nitrogen applied to soil, it destroys like 100 pounds of humus. The microorganisms that burn up the soil. They eat and eat. All the microorganisms are put into overdrive, and they are eating so voraciously to keep up with what was supplied to them. And in the end, there's nothing left for the plant roots, the vegetables that you see in the grocery stores. They're absolutely depleted. They might make it on time. They rot as soon as you get them home. So I don't need to keep I don't need to keep telling you to grow your own vegetables, but if you are those people that are interested and enjoy the learning, I just thought I would share a little bit of this carbon awareness from this book, The Carbon Connection. This was written by Leonard Ridson and Charles Walters, Jr. of Acres, USA. So I'm going to read about carbon. Carbon, atomic weight 12.011, is an important chemical, non-metallic element. Carbon takes all three forms of matter: solid, liquid, gas. In its purified state, carbon represents the world's most treasured gem, the diamond. Charcoal, soft and hard coal, they're all largely carbon. The purer the carbon, the better quality of coal. Petroleum, oil, and gases pumped from the earth are high in carbon content. Carbon also presents as carbonates in the composition of other minerals like chalk, calcite, dolomite, calamine, and others. However, every form of carbon found on Earth has its origin from former plant or animal life, the residues of which had somehow become fixed in our Earth's surface or crust. The ore-bearing rocks of the Earth originally contained no carbon, but it had to be acquired from the atmosphere as carbon dioxide, principally through photosynthesis, whereby plants converted it to living tissue. Under certain circumstances, carbon is an inactive element. A piece of charcoal, graphite, or diamond may lie unchanged for ages in water. All will be without taste or odor and can't be melted. Under other circumstances, carbon may be very active and mobile, as witnessed by the fact that it may enter into more than 20,000 known chemical combinations. In fact, the entire field of organic chemistry may be aptly referred to as carbon chemistry. So we need to be reminded that we have climate change due to excess carbon emissions. So I'm backing up to a greater understanding and awareness of how carbon plays a role on this planet. Throughout every phase of agriculture, carbon is the indispensable element that supports and innervates every function of microbial life, plant, and animal life. Carbon is the great biotic, organic, biochemical fuel that gives heat, speeds both inorganic and organic reactions, but inorganically, it deals with living matter. In its living matter wherein it has its major role. On a dry weight basis, it represents upwards of 50% of the total composition of all plant growth. Without carbon, there would be no plants. Without plants, there would be no life. It's the basic element of our life-sustaining universe. Every form of animate life, which in turn depends upon products of plant life for subsistence, is basically dependent upon the element of carbon. Carbon enters into the composition of all plant and animal tissue. Furthermore, the element carbon is nature's cornerstone upon which all elements of nutrition are built. Without carbon, there's no protein. Without carbon, there's no fats, no oils. Without carbon, there would be no vitamins, amino acids, enzymes, or hormones. So closely is carbon linked to all of life processes and functions that without it, life could not exist. Yeah, you already assumed that. But while carbon may enter into thousands of different chemical compositions, agriculturally speaking, two forms are worthy of consideration. The first are the more purified, stable forms found in the humus constituents of soils and in the composition of protein, sugar, starches, oils, and fats. The second one is gaseous. That is carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide, or carbonic acid gas, is a well-known compound containing 1 atom of carbon, 2 of oxygen. Colorless. It is colorless. It exists in small quantities in the atmospheric air at the rate of 3 or 4 parts in every 10,000. It is formed by burning of fuel, breathing of animals and humans, fermentation, and by the decomposition of animal and vegetable matter. Carbon dioxide is incombustible. It will put out the flame of a lighted candle, gas, jet, or even a piece of phosphorus. When these are placed in a jar filled with gas, it is not poisonous. However, too much carbon dioxide in the air prevents the lungs from obtaining needed oxygen. So when this book was written in the 90s, carbon dioxide was 4 parts in every 10,000 in our atmosphere. And somehow they're saying this is what's driving climate change. So small. Carbon dioxide moves into plants through the stomates, their breathing pores of their leaves. It's converted to form a large part of the tissues of the vegetative world. The starch of wheat, oats, rice, barley, potatoes, bananas, in short, all starchy foods, is built up of carbon dioxide and water. The gas, CO2, enters the leaves, and water moves into the roots. A farmer who sells hogs, cattle, butter, cheese, sugar, beets, flour, potatoes, or any other kind of produce is marketing little but water and gas, millions and billions of pounds of which will again become dissolved into our atmosphere. The end products of all complete digestion are again water and carbon dioxide. Through the miracle of photosynthesis in plants, energy from sunshine, carbon dioxide, and water are combined to form carbohydrates, which supply heat and energy for the support of life. To this combination must be added another element, nitrogen, which supplies the growth factor. Nitrogen alone energizes and supports all of the functions of growth and development for every form and species of life, whereas carbohydrates and fats supply the go power to life. Nitrogen supplies the grow power. Nitrogen is an element existing in nature as colorless, odorless, tasteless gas. It forms 78% of the weight of the Earth's atmosphere, which translated means that there exists 39,000 tons of atmospheric nitrogen over every acre of land and sea on the Earth's surface. Nitrogen is an essential constituent of all animal and plant tissue. Nutritionally, it's one of the main elements in amino acids that builds the protein molecules which provide and stimulate the growth factor in every living cell. Nitrogen, like carbon, is an airborne element. Like carbon, it was not an original constituent of the rocks that form the crust of our Earth's surface. Nitrogen, like carbon, had to become fixed in the soil principally from decomposing residues of previous life. It's noteworthy to realize that while nitrogen represents 78% of the atmosphere's composition, carbon represents only 0.03% as carbon dioxide. With the exception of legumes, in symbiosis with root nodule-producing bacteria to fix atmospheric nitrogen, and several non-legumes in symbiosis with root-entwining fungi as a less able nitrogen-fixing combination. Peas. We love peas. We plant peas. They fix nitrogen. It's magic, and they're so yummy. It's nature's candy. To accommodate this necessity, nature has devised a special nitrogen storage facility in the soil itself. This process is activated by millions of soil microbes. It brings about a product of certain stability involving the elements of carbon and nitrogen. In this process, all forms of organic matter ranging widely in their carbon to nitrogen ratio, like alfalfa is 12 to 1 on the spectrum, rotted manure is 20 to 1. It's a lot of nitrogen. Sugar cane trash is 50 to 1, straw 80 to 1. Just sawdust is 400 parts nitrogen to 1 part carbon. When organic matter has thus become reduced to the ultimate of 10.4 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen, I just corrected myself, the end products will be represented as brown colloidal bodies, collectively known as humus. So the ratio, I reversed that, sorry. So if you're putting sawdust in your garden soil, you're putting 400 parts of nitrogen to the 1 part carbon. Well, that wouldn't work so well, and this explains why. Organic matter becomes reduced to 10.4 carbon to 1 part nitrogen. The end product will be represented as brown colloidal bodies collectively known as humus. The process whereby humus is formed is still as much a mystery as life itself. Someone referred to humus as, quote, nature's womb, where the principle of life had its beginning and from which it is eternally sustained. Humus represents nature's one and only device for storage and holding of both nitrogen and carbon in soils in certain natural ratios. Humus is insoluble in water and thus not readily subject to leaching. Neither can either carbon or nitrogen be naturally leached out of humus, though available to microbes. So nitrogen fixed directly in the nodules of leguminous plants like pole beans or peas or what's another legume? The black locust tree is a legume. There's other legumes out there. Look them up. Only the soil microbes which contrive to fix and store nitrogen in the first place can reactivate it again to supply their wants and needs when it's in combination with carbon. So we're drying out some biochar, which is a calcified form of carbon, which we add and we are trading as a valuable commodity and mailing it. That's why I'm drying this out. And you get to watch the fire. This is this angle. It's a little hot. Maybe we'll back up. Every crop leaves behind in the soil a measure of organic matter, represented in the root systems of the plant. This organic matter is in turn reduced to humus by the soil microorganisms. If this conversion did not take place, the soils would become clogged with such debris, much the same as do the drains in your bathroom. Through such conversions, soil microorganisms whose cell bodies have a narrower carbon to nitrogen ratio, 5 to 1, than does humus, because humus prefers 10 to 1. They have a positive need for sufficient nitrogen supply. In such manner, nature has, throughout the ages, built and maintained her virgin soils to the utmost peak of balanced fertility. Although soils may differ widely in the kind of quantity of natural minerals necessary for best performance, nature has provided special species for each area to accommodate the tolerances that such soils provide. Nature would not try to grow alfalfa on the soil where cranberries do best. So, to accomplish these many miraculous works within the soil, nature depends solely upon the efforts of billions upon billions of microorganisms that swarm in the soil. So tiny are these organisms, 500 million of them would weigh less than 1 gram. There are 453 grams to a pound. These tiny organisms are ever alert, willing, and frightfully voracious. Foremost, and absolutely essential to their well-being and continued activity, is the element nitrogen. In the same manner that a colony of honeybees will send its workers to collect nectar from thousands of flowers, then convert it into a honeycomb as a perfectly processed product for its future food supply, just so do the various soil microbes. They process and store the products of their activity in a uniform product, humus, also as a guarantee of future food supply. In a mineral soil, which by laboratory analysis reveals 3% organic matter content in the top 8 inches of soil, one may expect to find 60,000 pounds of such humus. Upon further analysis of this humus, it will be found that it is composed of 34,800 pounds of carbon and 3,000 pounds of fixed nitrogen. Likewise, a soil containing only 1% of organic matter would show only 20,000 pounds of humus, with 11,000 pounds of carbon and 1,000 pounds of fixed nitrogen. The fertility level of any soil may be judged generally by its organic matter content. When a farmer, after picking his corn crop, plows under residues, stalks, leaves, husks, he will create a state of mayhem in the soil. The sudden availability of all that carbonaceous raw organic matter challenges the soil's microbes' life into immediate overactivity. This is the busybody. However, the wide carbon to nitrogen ratio, 60:1 in that material, poses the necessity for an extra nitrogen supply. So this nitrogen is acquired by microbes simply seizing and appropriating the free nitrogen in the soil. Through that action, plant life may actually starve for want of nitrogen, which the microbes are temporarily using just to build their cell bodies to perform their function. They're growing and they're growing. They have to deal. They're responding to that action. So plants are left on their own because the microbes are way too busy to help them. So the plants must accommodate themselves with whatever is left over. When a large mass of highly carbonaceous organic matter is placed in the soil that has low organic matter content and low total nitrogen level, a seriously unbalanced situation will prevail. With a sufficient nitrogen supply, the soil's microbes cannot perform their intended task, and much of the material will be left unconverted to be plowed up again during the next rotation. So this is the industrial agricultural regime that's been happening for a very long time, and this is what we don't want. Such a situation is unfavorable for good plant growth. It may be avoided if the farmer will simply provide 1 pound of available nitrogen for each 100 pounds of such carbonaceous material as he turns it under. Under such conditions, enough nitrogen will generally be provided to satisfy the needs of all the microbes and yet allow for some for the plants. When an excess of nitrogen is supplied to the soil, an amount over and above the requirements of soil microbes to perform their various functions, a reverse situation will be affected. Excess nitrogen will avidly be seized and appropriated by the microbial life, which for lack of raw organic matter will utilize the stored humus in the soil for their activities, so it drains the humus. Too much nitrogen fertilizer added. Now, instead of seeking nitrogen, they seek carbon to provide the heat and energy for their function. When soil microbes are forces to appropriate humus in order to obtain carbon, they completely destroy the humus particle so that both the carbon and the fixed nitrogen are simultaneously released up in the atmosphere. In such a manner an additional supply of nitrogen will be available. The nitrogen supplied is a fertilizer, and the nitrogen released by the soil. So it's going in the atmosphere. Recent research with tagged nitrogen revealed that more than 50% of the nitrogen utilized by the plant was natural nitrogen supplied directly by the soil. It is this extra nitrogen resulting from the destruction of humus molecules in the soil that gives the practice of heavy nitrogen fertilization its impetus. Soils that had a natural capacity to produce 75 bushels of corn per acre were suddenly found to produce 150 bushels per acre. The results were phenomenal. The increased use of nitrogen received the credit. This practice was considered as a major breakthrough for increased yields for all crops, and new nitrogen processing plants appeared all over the country like mushrooms in the spring. Farmers formerly strove to provide and maintain an adequate organic matter supply in their rotation. The present attitude has changed to where organic matter is considered unimportant because nitrogen fertilizers have proved such stunning results. This mistaken attitude is in error on two accounts. It is expensive, and it's highly depletionary. Every pound of excess nitrogen applied to the soil will destroy 100 pounds of stored humus. This present attitude is responsible for converting modern agriculture into the world's greatest mining operation of its most basic and important asset, the humus stored in our soils. Nature somehow prevents the accumulation and buildup of surplus-free nitrogen in soil. Only by way of the carbon-nitrogen cycling process can it become fixed and held in the soil. Generally speaking, any surplus nitrogen applied as fertilizer will disappear in the season during which it's applied. Nature has purposely designed soil to be bottomless to permit excessive nitrate nitrogen and any other acids that may become toxic to a plant to conveniently leach from the root zone of the soil. This report is not intended to be an argument against the use of fertilizers, but rather as an expose on the present-day misuse of it. Nitrogen is an essential element for all plant growth. It prospers best when it is permitted to fully participate in nature's carbon-nitrogen cycles. This can be accomplished when a farmer will supply enough raw organic material in his rotations to match his nitrogen application at a ratio of at least 100 pounds of dry organic matter to each 1 pound of nitrogen supplied. For a decade, this author has been using coal in soil systems. He was in Ohio. Some of the results have been measured in pragmatic ways. Corn that can stand a killing frost, less corn borer damage, increased yields, drought resistant, increased fertility, increased earthworms, populations, early maturity of crops, less disease, increased sugar content of fruit by 7%. The rain arrives in abundance, but runoff remains at a minimum. The land speaks for itself and waves off the piece of paper bankers hold in their hands when there is profit in the system. Yet the role of carbon and its interaction with plant nutrients, a role so vital in preserving solvency for a family farm, is one of the least covered and understood by the farm press in general. The use of coal thus makes its own suggestion for farmers in a nation with soils that no longer contain the proper inventory of carbon. And then I finish with, there's a quote, "Healthy soils will pay off almost any size mortgage within reason. Put carbon on your soil. The Creator provided you, and the soil will provide you." This is a quote that the author liked because it's true and not merely his quote. So, I reread that book a lot. And I spend a lot of time making biochar and burning wood, and I do believe that it is something anyone can do. It's worth the trouble, and fire is purifying and therapeutic, and Brian's coming with more wood with the DR Power Wagon. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.